has created only one thing. Hello.
Hello everyone, good to be back.
Yes, good, very good to be back. So good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world right now.
Right. We have a lot of people already connected. I'm seeing from a bunch of places. I'm seeing Indiana here, Los Angeles, Costa Rica, the UK, Staten Island, New York. I'm seeing Tennessee, Melbourne, Australia. Hello there. Mexico, a lot of places. Jersey. Hi everyone, great to be here.
So we were actually just in Jersey now.
Yep.
For a worldwide Kabbalah convention. Now, because this is really lesson 3, so we didn't, so you might have not even heard about it. Some of you did if you checked out our website. Basically, I'm just telling you this so you already get a heads up for the next convention, because this is something you do not want to miss. Whatever we teach you here, whatever we talk about here is on a certain level, but whatever you experience when you go to a Kabbalah convention is already, let's call it practical Kabbalah, something that you could actually experience what we're learning here. So while we're learning now, start absorbing it in, and just it's kind of a heads up for the future, so I'm planting a seed there.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to today's lesson. And before we start, just to remind you that you can ask questions on the chat, and we encourage you to do so. And if you're watching,
maybe even remind our names. There's a chance that
there is a chance
that our students don't remember. So I'm Asaf and
Gilad. Yes.
And we'll take any question that is related to the topic of the lesson first.
Right, and if you're watching this downloaded, so then you can post your questions on ec.kabbalah@kabbalah.info. So before we begin, I want to share a little experiment with you. So the experiment, I might have shared this actually in the first lesson. If I did, then let's see how many of you are following, and post your answers in the chat to the question I'm going to ask in 1 minute. So the experiment goes as follows. So scientists wanted to figure out how a person perceives reality. That's the topic of the lesson today. How do we perceive reality? So it was a really interesting experiment. They took that person and they connected that person to electrodes. His brain, they connected him to electrodes, and they wanted to figure out 2 things. What quantity of information his mind is exposed to every second, and they found that every second his brain was exposed to 400 billion bytes of information per second, every single second. That's quite a lot of information. However, they also found that a person wasn't really able to interpret all of that. He wasn't able to interpret all of that information. He was only able to interpret a part of it. So from everything that kind of hit him, he was only able to really interpret a part of it. So the question to you is, what part? Out of that 400 billion bytes of information that his mind was exposed to every single second, how many of those bytes was he able to actually interpret and process into something useful? So everything I see around me, that's already processed information, right? I can see, I can feel, I can touch, I can hear. All these things are a result of information that my brain has already processed. So the question is, when I see Brandon from Texas is giving a nice guess.
Giving us the percent, yeah.
Yeah, so it's 0.0000005% of reality.
Right.
That's a pretty small percent of reality. So do you all agree with that? So to translate that percent Brandon wrote into numbers, the number goes like this. So it's 2,000. That's it. In other words, out of this reality that we know or don't know is out there, all we're really getting is a very tiny, thin slice of 0.0000005% of reality. That's what we're able to perceive, to interpret, to understand. But really, Kabbalah says that the reality that's out there, which is actually even way beyond these 400 billion bytes. It's in a completely different level, but we'll get to that later on. Kabbalah says there is a world of Ein Sof, of infinity, of perfection, of utter fulfillment, of infinite pleasure. And all of that wonder and all of that beauty and all of that infinity is really concealed from our senses. We don't see that, we don't feel it, we don't touch it. Instead, we live in a world where we feel that maybe the opposite of what I described. We feel uncertainty and lack of pleasure and lack of fulfillment. And sometimes we feel that we're in control of everything, but in more cases than not, we feel like things aren't connected and they aren't part of a general picture. Like the clip we saw in the first lesson, you remember, with the painter, right? How the painter was painting this picture and the audience didn't understand what he's doing until he finally flipped it over and then it became clear. So we are sometimes like that viewer that are locked in this reality in a state that we don't even know where we are, because it's becoming clear today that we really don't know where we are, that scientists don't know what reality is. And they've been trying to figure this out. They've been trying to identify what is reality. So there have been a lot of methods over the years of scientists who've been trying to kind of describe reality, starting from, the classical perception that reality exists independent of human beings, and that it is as we see it and independent of us. But then it became clear to physicists that is incorrect, because we perceive our reality based on our senses, right? So this is actually a pretty clear example if you think of an animal, of how they perceive reality. So imagine like getting into a dog's head for a second, or a cat, or a snake, or a bird, or a bee, and imagine how they see that same room that you're in now. They see it quite differently, right? A dog has a strong sense of smell. A bee has a different perception in terms of its lenses. A snake sees according to thermal. So it's clear that the reality we see out there, we don't really know what it is. In other words, what is outside of us really? What's out here? It's actually a big question mark. What really is out here? We don't know what's out here. All we know is what we can perceive based on our senses, right? Which are limited, which are actually, we'll see soon, not really senses. So let's read a quick excerpt from Baal HaSulam. So it's the first slide on the quote slides. Let's have a look at that in a second. There we go. So this is from Preface to the Book of Zohar on item 34. And the Kabbalist Yudah Ashlag, which is also known as Baal HaSulam, he writes the following. He writes, take our sense of sight, for example. We see a wide world before us, wondrously filled. But in fact, we see all of that only in our own interior. In other words, there is a sort of photographic machine in our hindbrain which portrays everything that appears to us and nothing outside of us. For that, he has made for us there in our brain a kind of polished mirror that inverts everything seen there, so we will see it outside our brain, in front of your face. Yet what we see outside of us is not a real thing. So what Baal HaSulam is saying here, that we see what we see, but we don't know what is really out there. We don't really know. Everything, look around now, everything you're looking at, actually, it's a bit funny, but Kabbalah says that all of this, everything you see around you, is fictitious, it's fake, it's imaginary. It doesn't exist. Now you're probably jumping out of your seat. What do you mean doesn't exist? I can see it, I can sense it, I can touch it. Correct, you can see it, you can sense it, you can touch it. But it's because it is such a small fraction of what reality really is. It's nothing. It is literally, in comparison to what reality truly is, in comparison to how the potential we truly have, what you see around you is literally considered nothing, a fake imaginary world. And the reason why we're in this fake imaginary world is so that we can learn how to come out of it. And that's the wisdom of Kabbalah, actually. So let's maybe quickly recap. Basically, we talked about a simple concept, and that concept is we don't know what reality we're in. That's it. It's clear that depending on the senses that I have, depending on how I look around, if I look around through human eyes, or if I look around through thermal sense of a snake, or through the eyes of a bird, or through the perception of a fish, based on that, I will every time look at this reality and I will see it differently. I will see colors differently. I will sense everything around me differently. So, the conclusion is the reality is completely subjective, and by the way, no scientist will tell you otherwise. It's very clear to science today that the moment we examine reality, and this was conveyed in the double-slit experiment in the 1920s, it's very clear that as soon as we observe an object, we interact with it, we interfere with it, and therefore we no longer perceive the object itself. We perceive it based on our interference with it. So what is the object itself independently of us? We don't know. And that's what science has reached today. And Kabbalah is actually taking it a step further. It's explaining what science will surely soon find out, is that the object does not even exist outside of a person, but it's all perceived within that person. All right, so now that we've confused ourselves a little bit, now we can take the rest of the lesson to explain what that means, and feel free to ask your questions on the chat and be interactive. It's very helpful for us, because that way we feel that we're actually teaching a class and not just looking at two cameras and a computer screen. And that's very helpful for our perception of reality.
Right, so definitely just go ahead if you have any questions about what Gilad just explained, or anything that you think is in the area, in the topic, just shoot it. For instance, I see Tricia from Indiana. You have a question mark at the end of this, but I don't quite get the question. Maybe try to clarify it. In a spiritual form, maybe Tricia is relating to something. You have an idea?
I'm not sure, but just so you know, guys, we have about a 30-second delay. So I guess she's continuing from a sentence I said directly,
Could
or
be.
you said maybe.
Could be.
So we have a 30-second delay, so you're going to have to be time bit more specific. So please follow up on that question, Tricia, and we'll be happy to answer it. In the meanwhile, we will continue, and we'll be expecting your questions. So let's continue. Let's see where we're headed. Okay, so in other words, in this lesson, our goal is to find out what reality is, and even more so, can we influence reality? If we understand where we are, if we really figure this out, what the reality is, can we then maybe influence it? Can we change it? Because the first thing that a person would need to do in order to understand his life, to understand his fate, to understand his or her, your destiny, is to understand where you are. And it's clear from the last 14 minutes that we don't know where we are. I mean, we think we're at home, we think we're watching a lesson on a computer now. We're in the United States or in Australia or in Europe or in Africa or wherever we are in the world. We think that because we look around us and we see. But it's clear that the senses we're using to do that are only depicting a certain picture of reality. And if we change those senses, we'll see something else. So the question still stands. What is reality? Maybe if we can answer that, then we can answer why things happen to us and how one thing is related to the other. Because that's what we promised you in the first lesson, that we'll start giving you this map to understand everything in reality, to understand how to master your fate, how one thing connects to the other, right? And in order to do that, we need to understand, first of all, where are we? So I see we already have, wow.
Yeah, we have a bunch of questions.
Nice
Thank
stream of
you.
questions.
So let's go.
We're
Let's dive.
actually in a class. There are actual students here.
There are
Great.
actual students.
That is a great revelation every time again.
Right. So we have a question coming from Coney from New Jersey. So everything is an illusion created by our expectations. Like I expect to see my house when I turn the other way or turn the corner. Therefore, I see it. Is that how it works?
Interesting, Connie. Very interesting. I'm not going to answer that right this second, because in a moment we're going to explain this mechanism exactly according to which we perceive reality. So we'll save that question. If it's still unclear after the next explanation, then please ask again, Connie.
All right. David from Manitoba asked, and Tricia said that was the question that she wanted to ask as well. Do you mean reality is like the movie, The Matrix, or I'm way off here?
Actually, it's not the first time I've heard this analogy from people after they hear the explanation. So, in a way, you can say it is like the Matrix, in a way. There is a lot more to it, but in a way, yes, the reality we see right now is a little bit like we're in a dream, and we're seeing it. I mean, the Matrix depicted it in a certain way. I can't even remember. They're asleep somewhere.
In the Matrix, we're talking about a reality that is simulated by robots. And we're living in a reality that is actually a simulation, a digital simulation dominated and programmed by robots. Now, the fact that the reality that we're seeing right now is a kind of a simulation, that is very similar to what Kabbalah explains, but it's not programmed by robots.
Right.
It's programmed by nature itself. And,
right. And
you know, we'll explain that further later on.
Actually, let's just go into the explanation now.
All right.
And then we'll see if there are more questions following up on that. All right. So basically, okay, do you want to have another one?
You know what? Let's go with this, and because the other ones are kind of...
Okay. So, great.
But if you guys have more questions as we go, just go ahead. We'll make it dynamics, you know.
Yep.
Ask and we'll answer, and we'll make it a mutual lesson.
Right.
Let's go.
So we're going back to that same question we asked at the beginning, and we'll keep asking that. So where are we? So the answer is we don't really know where we are. We just know that we perceive something based on our senses. And actually, the wisdom of Kabbalah tells us that we are a little black box. And this black box has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 openings. What are these 5 openings? They're our sense of smell, touch, sight, hearing, and what did I miss? Taste. That's it. Right. So those are our 5 senses. So we can sense reality through these 5 senses. And that's basically our openings, right? So cut off these senses one by one, and the picture of reality that you have will gradually disappear. Cut off all 5 senses, you have no perception of reality anymore. You have no connection to it. So you could say in a way that what's outside of us isn't really known, but whatever it is, then it hits these senses of ours, and based on that, we have this picture of reality. So what Baal Sulam says here, and what we read before, he basically explained that there's a photographic machine in our hindbrain. So there's this, like, within our minds there is this machine which portrays everything that appears to us, he says, and nothing that's outside of us. So, in other words, what we see inside. We don't know what is really outside of us. All we know is that something hits these senses of ours, and based on that we have a picture of reality. Now, Kabbalah explains something that's actually pretty groundbreaking, because the fact that we have these senses, that's clear, that's nothing new here. But how these senses operate, that is something new. Meaning, what is that? And we may have spoken about this. I told you that my entire life I was searching for that single equation that describes everything in reality. And you can say that this describes everything in reality because this is all we see. This is our entire perception of reality. And scientists have been searching for this as well. They've been looking for that single equation that describes everything nicely and simply. You can kind of say it's like the E equals mc squared of everything, not just of matter or time or space, but of everything, of all the forces in nature. And that's exactly what the wisdom of Kabbalah does. It explains that very simple equation which defines the software and the hardware of this program. So the hardware of this program is actually the same hardware the entire creation was created with. It's a very simple law. You ready for this law? This law basically describes everything in the world. So this hardware that was created, what is it? You know what? Let's give you 30 seconds. That's the time it will take you to get this question, to guess. What is this single law that defines the hardware of reality? The only thing that was created. That very same program, you and I and everyone you know, and actually everything you see, including the still, the vegetative, the animate, everything is built on that very same program. Sorry, from that very same piece of hardware. What is the law of that hardware? So we'll give you a few seconds before we continue, and maybe in the meantime, let's read the next quote. So that's quote number 2. And Baal Sulam says this: we do not speak of Atzmuto, his essence, at all, meaning everything that's outside of us, we don't know what that is. That's his essence, that's Atzmuto. This is because the root and the place of the creatures, that's us, the created beings, begin in the thought of creation where they are incorporated. So basically, Baal Sulam is saying here that we do not speak of his essence, we don't know what his essence is, but we do speak of his thought, of the thought of creation. And that is really this unknown that's outside of us. So we don't know what really this force, this force of nature is, his essence, his atzmuto as it's called, but we do aim to reach the thought of his creation, as it's called.
Right, so we have some guesses from our students here. Marilyn from New York says the desire to receive. Michael from Rhode Island also says the will to receive. David from Manitoba also says is the law, the will to receive. So this is one direction. Do unto others. That's another suggestion from Kitty Cricket from Montreal. There's a creator and the creature, says Brandon from Texas. That's interesting. The creator and the creature. Okay, so what's the dynamic that works in the relationship between the creator and the creature? That's where we need to go. All right, so then there's another question here which we'll collect for now.
So very good answers, everyone. So that's correct. This hardware is called the will to receive. Maybe it's missing one extra word. Receive what? It would be pleasure or fulfillment. So that's it. That's the equation. That's everything in reality. A will to receive pleasure. Whether if it's this desk here made of wood that has atoms and electrons that are wanting to be at equilibrium or a complete rest. Well, it depends on what level you look at it. The electrons themselves are jumping back and forth, but they're jumping from states of balance of energy. So every level you look at is always striving to reach its state, its definition of complete rest. And you can see that the vegetative, it always goes to the sun, where it will get the most out of it. It goes to the water, where it will get the most out of it. The animate, the speaking, always aiming to receive maximum pleasure. So that is the hardware. Now, actually, this also has been said by some. Some philosophers have reached this conclusion. And the addition is that the wisdom of Kabbalah adds another layer to it. So this is the hardware. I mean, the hardware is what it is, and that will not change, and that can't change, and it's not good nor bad, by the way. It just is. So our hardware, that will not change, will not be upgraded, but what can change and what can be upgraded, and based on that, everything we see and perceive is dependent on, is the software. Meaning, according to what rule do we receive this pleasure? So, you ready for it? So the software, let's write it up here because we're out of room down here. And the software is something we actually talk about in the wisdom of Kabbalah. That's actually the main focus of it. Because the wisdom of Kabbalah, just a quick reminder, as you know, Kabbalah in Hebrew, this is how you write it, Ka-ba-la. And that means, the translation of it to English is to receive. That's what it means. And the wisdom of Kabbalah is the wisdom of how to receive. Now, you might ask, but wait a minute. I want to learn how to give. I want to learn how to be in harmony, in balance, etc., etc., etc. But if all there is the will to receive, then you cannot do any other action. And this is sometimes hard to hear at the beginning, but think about it. Every single action you do is only to receive, and you cannot change that. And it's not good nor bad. It's not a bad thing that that's the way it is. It's just the way it is. So how can you change? You can learn how to receive. You can learn how to change your software. So to learn how to change your software, which is actually learning how to unlock this limited perception of reality to like a hack door that can link us directly to all the pleasure and all the abundance and all the goodness that's already out there. So first let's understand what our software is. And the software is a will to receive pleasure with the intention in order to receive. Okay, so now you have everything. Take a few seconds, absorb it in. We are a will to receive pleasure. That's our hardware. The software on top of it, why do we receive? In order to receive. So this is actually, the software is really, what is it? It's an intention. And the intention can change the action entirely, completely, 180 degrees. Imagine this scenario. You take a knife and you cut someone with it. Good or bad? Well, some of you might be appalled. Oh my God, cut someone with a knife. That's terrible. But what if you're a doctor and you're using that knife to save a life? Right? But if you didn't understand anything and you just saw someone take a knife and cut someone, you might think they're trying to do them harm. So what completely changes the situation here, what changes it 180 degrees is simply the intention. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Right? So if you change your intention, you can completely change your action, and as a result of that, completely change the outcome of your action. All right, so we've learned a few extra concepts, so we'll do a quick recap and we'll go into questions. So it goes like this. Number one, we don't know where we are. It's true, we don't. We're in this limited reality. We don't know what it is. We don't know how to perceive it. We don't know what's beyond our senses. All we know is that we have our senses, and based on that, we perceive reality. We have, let's say, 5 openings. But actually, I want to add something else here. These aren't openings at all. They're not openings to reality. They're filters. They filter what reality truly is. So reality goes into this, and they filter it out according to what? According to that same software of theirs. In other words, if you put on your glasses, for example, a blue filter, then what's outside of you is whatever, say, all the spectrum of light, and what you'll see will be filtered out. The blue lens will filter out the colors, so you will see everything as blue, right? So the filter, based on the qualities of that filter, that will determine what you will see outside of you. So these senses are filters, and they're filters that work according to this hardware, a will to receive pleasure, with the intention in order to receive, and based on that perception, you filter out what reality truly is. Based on that perception, you see reality as you see it. Unfortunately, it's not so great. I'm not talking about your personal life necessarily, I'm talking about humanity in general. Look at the world. Look at where we're living in. We're in a world of chaos. We're in times of chaos. And we have this mechanism that justifies ourselves, and that's good, otherwise it'd be difficult to live. But if you look at the world really, we feel deep inside that it can be better, that there's something more to it. And that sensation of yours is exactly correct, because that sensation of yours comes from that single point inside, which we'll get to in a moment, that wants to connect to this bigger piece of reality, that wants to upgrade its software, finally. So let's just go back to our recap. So we say this, we don't know where we are, but we do have these 5 openings, and now we just said they're not really openings, they're filters. They're filters of what's outside of there. And then we said that we know the hardware and the software. So the hardware, we said, is a will to receive. In pleasure. And the software is with the intention to receive. Okay, so that's basically what we covered today. We're soon going to explain how we can come out of this, let's call it a narrow existence, because it really is narrow in comparison to what's outside of there. But we wouldn't say that if there wasn't a way out of it, and if we couldn't tell you this soon in this lesson. So let's just get to a few questions before.
All right, so we have a bunch of questions here. David asked a while ago, then how do we wake up? We'll leave that for a few minutes later on. Let's do a quick let's try a blitz on the other questions first. So Robert from Germany asked earlier on, we know that more than half of the universe consists of dark matter and dark energy. They're called dark because we cannot perceive it in any way. Could it be that the 5 spiritual worlds are located there? Simple answer, no. There is absolutely nothing that has to do with what physicists discover and the spiritual reality. The reason is very simple. Anything and everything that ordinary sciences discover, physics included, comes from their exploration and research through the 5 senses and the tools that they use to extend or expand the range of frequencies that they can perceive through the 5 senses. So we use a microscope to sort of delve into matter and see more than we normally see. We use a telescope to see farther than we usually see. And in a similar way, all the tools, the scientific tools that we use, are basically devices that work in correspondence with our 5 senses. So the kind of reality that we can perceive is only a further detailed reality of this world. When we're talking about spirituality, when we're talking about the spiritual reality, Gilad actually just clarified exactly what is the tool that has nothing to do with the 5 senses through which we can perceive the spiritual reality. And that is installing a new software, as he called it, on top of our existing hardware, which will not change. And that is something which is called an intention to bestow. It's something that we need to learn what it is. In the technical language of Kabbalah, it's referred to as screen and returning light, concepts that we don't understand, but they're very empirical, they're very measurable, they're very specific, they're not theoretical, they're not airy, they're very, very specific and empirical, and they are attained by Kabbalists, not theorized. And the Kabbalah is the method for how to develop that extra sense, if you want to call it that way, or that additional software, how to install that on top of our existing hardware. Call it however you want, a new program, but that is what you need in order to attain the spiritual reality. No devices in our world, or even theoretical approximations, which physicists love to do, will help you, because they're based on our five senses and our brain, which is a big, a cutting-edge calculator that takes all those impressions from the five senses and tries to calculate them in some smart ways. The kind of change that you need in order to perceive the spiritual reality is the development of an additional sensory organ, an additional sense. And for that, the scientist has to develop the device within himself or herself. All right? So
I just want to add to that while I look for the next question. So just imagine that you take a telescope or even a microscope, two things that are on a different spectrum. So you enlarge very, very small things that are close to you, or you zoom in on things that are very, very far away. So these things here, they're not opening up a new sense to our reality, right? They're not, as I've just explained here, they're not changing how we perceive reality. All they are extensions of these existing senses. So I can see only 100 feet away, so instead now I can see 100,000 miles away with a telescope, for example. Or if I want to increase my hearing, then I can add the special hearing device, etc., etc., etc. So all of these things here, they are not changing our perception of reality, they're extending our current senses. And in Kabbalah, we're talking about developing an entirely new sense. We gave you a hint to what it is. You can see it here in this illustration in red. It's a little nice sweetheart. And you can see it in the drawing here. That's the beginning of something new that we'll elaborate on that in a few moments, but let's get back to some more questions.
Right, so I see that this brings up interest, so might as well stay on this topic and conclude it. So Hesney, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, from Westchester, New York, says, what are you saying about scientists that don't always apply? For instance, Einstein, his reflections went beyond the five human senses in the physical world. Well, look, and there's another question from Kitty Cricket from Montreal and so forth. We'll conclude it in a very simple way. There is a structure to this world that is similar in its structure to all the other layers of reality beyond the physical world. The foundational structure of reality is the same on every level, the physical level or the five spiritual levels that Kabbalists attain and explain to us. This is why certain things that we discover through ordinary science in our world, they can somehow be similar to the structure of reality in general. And this is why you see advanced research in physics, such as quantum physics, coming to all kinds of conclusions about the structure of our world that sound similar to what Kabbalah explains and so forth. And that is why, physicists who research the structure of reality, the underlying structure of reality, they come to conclusions that are towards Kabbalah. But there's this threshold, there's this border between just approximating and estimating how reality is actually built and then actually attaining it, which requires changing yourself, developing that new sense that we've talked about. And that is the border between ordinary science, which is based on the five senses and tools that extend their range, and spiritual science, or the wisdom of Kabbalah, which is based on the additional sense that we're now learning how to develop. So, all right, great. So we had a few more questions. What kind of, Faye from Los Angeles was asking, what kind of senses or sight do we need to develop or open to consciously perceive or live in the greater spiritual reality? So that's exactly. So
yeah, I think we kind of answered that, Faye, because you can kind of walk around with a telescope on your eyes, and it won't change how you perceive reality, because you need to change the program, the software that you have installed, and by doing that, you're not extending your existing senses. It's like, we don't like calling it a sixth sense, because it really isn't equal to the five, but it's like a new sense. It's a spiritual sense that perceives on a completely different level, on a different frequency. And then it opens up. Try to imagine another sense that you have. It's actually quite impossible to do that, because you can't even imagine what sense you're missing, right? Think about it for a second. It's an interesting exercise. Try to imagine that you once had another sense and it was taken away from you. What was that sense? So, actually, this is the case. You did have once another sense. We won't go into the whole explanation now, but that spiritual sense, we were once in complete revelation of it, in contact with it. And what you all have now, that kind of, that itch inside, that's a result of that, actually, of the fact that you were once in contact with it. Otherwise, you would have no recollection, you would have no connection to it. So, you can't imagine what sense you're missing, right? It's impossible. And that is because you don't know what you're missing. But Kabbalah says that this sense, this sixth sense, or another sense, or a spiritual sense, opens up an entirely different, I don't want to say even dimension, because dimension is still perceived that it's something in this world, it's another dimension. No, it's like a spiritual dimension. It's outside of everything and anything that is on the level of this world.
All right, I see a bunch of questions here, and I think we can maybe explain something that will help our students. And these are good questions. Thank you for asking them. It shows us what we need to further explain. So, a few students, such as Trisha, I see, and Beth from North Carolina, and others, are trying to understand what is that additional sense. Is it meditation? Can it be achieved through something like astral projection? Does it have to do with intuition? What is that additional sense that we're talking about? And also, when can we start measuring our progress in that empirical way? Maybe we'll try to do a diagram to help us with this. So this is actually quite a... All right. Next, new, where we go?
Plus.
There we go. So, look. Kabbalah explains the following. We exist in this world with our physical body. Excuse me for my very advanced drawing. In this physical reality, right?
If they get any sense, they might be able to see a better drawing.
And so, the reality that we're talking about, which we refer to as spiritual, that is not perceived through our body at all, not through the five senses that we have here, right? Those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 senses. And so what separates our perception between the physical and the spiritual is something we sometimes refer to in Kabbalah as a barrier. And in Hebrew, in the technical language of Kabbalah, it's called machsom, which basically means a barrier. Now, what is that barrier? It's not some hurdle that we need to go above, or some wall that we need to break. It's not anything like that. It's a threshold of sensitivity. Sensitivity to what? Sensitivity to the qualities that exist here. And the qualities that exist here in the spiritual reality are everything that exists in the spiritual reality is basically varying degrees of the quality of unconditional love and bestowal. And so that is not something we even know, because the moment we think of love, we immediately imagine it within our physical reality. We're talking about infinity, about perfection, about eternity, about something that is beyond our parameters of time, space, and motion. A reality that is not within the qualities that we are now familiar with. Because remember, our hardware is a will to receive pleasure, and our current software limits that pleasure to something very narrow. What we need to do is learn how to expand what we can receive into our vessel, so we can take in all that unconditional love and bestowal and eternity and perfection and flow of nature that exists in reality. And so that is not done through meditation, focusing on one thing, one limited thing or another. It's not done through all kinds of practices that have to do with our body, like changing how we breathe or how we think. It's not on that level at all. Rather, it's on that new sensitivity that we need to develop to a quality that is outside ourselves and outside our body. A quality of using our will to receive pleasure in an entirely new way. A new program on an existing hardware. Let's go with that depiction that we started from. Now, in terms of measuring the progress, here's the very interesting thing in Kabbalah. Kabbalists explain to us the following. From that level of the barrier onwards, this is like a zero level from which there are exactly 125 degrees of spiritual development. Not less or more, exactly 125. It has to do with the structure of our will to receive pleasure and how we attain different degrees of the spiritual reality in it. You'll understand this more in further lessons. Until we reach that 0 point, which is the same as crossing the barrier into the spiritual world, which is the same as attaining that first degree of sensitivity to the spiritual reality, which is the same as developing our intention and so forth. Until then, we are preparing that sense, we are building that sense, we are developing that sense. So we don't have exact measurements, but we do have feedback. This is called the preparation time, where we build the sense for the spiritual reality. That's what you're going through right now, and that begins from something very special that Gilad drew in the previous diagram, something called a point in your heart. Gilad will soon explain more what that is and how it develops. But essentially, that needs to develop to a minimal yet complete degree in which we can attain the spiritual reality. And even while that happens and we don't yet cross that barrier, we begin to understand the feedback. We begin to feel it grows. We begin to flex it like a muscle. And that is why the wisdom of Kabbalah is very practical. And it's very direct, and it's not theoretical, but you have to learn what you're supposed to feel. In that sense, it's similar to starting to work out and developing new muscles that suddenly you didn't feel before because you weren't flexing them, right? So this is really what we're doing here. It's very concrete. It's very empirical, and that's what we're here to do. So
let's go on to the next phase. And very happy to see that David and Caleb and Christopher from Salt Lake City are with us today.
Yeah.
We actually met them at the Congress, and very happy to see that you're with us now again. That's great, guys. Okay, so moving on to the next part. So by now you should be already understanding that this opening to the sixth sense is this point in the heart. But let's explain that a little bit more. Let's explain how it works and why it works that way. So in order to understand this better, let's talk about a certain principle. Not number one, we don't need number one here. Let's just title it like this: the law of equivalence. So basically, in order to understand this law, let's go to Baal HaSulam. Let's read a little bit what he says in the preface to the Wisdom of Kabbalah. If you have the book Kabbalah for the Student, which you should definitely have, you can get it on Kabbalahbooks.info. I think you still have a discount because all the students in the EC get a discount to purchase this book. This is basically holds in it what you'll need for the next few years of your study of Kabbalah. And we're reading from this now. So it's on page 570, Preface to the Wisdom of Kabbalah, from item 13. If we can open our slides, it's the third slide. Great. So let's read what Baal HaSulam says. He says, as corporeal objects are separated from one another by remoteness of location, spirituals are separated from each other by the disparity of form between them. Let's just explain that first sentence. So it's pretty clear. I have two corporeal objects, right? 1, 2. And these corporeal objects are separated according to the location. So I bring them together, now they're close, right? It's a black on a black background. Let's maybe get something lighter. So I have this, there we go. So I have this and this. Now I bring them close, so they're close. I take them far, so they're far. So in other words, Baal Sulam says here, let's go back to the slide, corporeal objects are separated from one another by remoteness of location. Okay, and spirituals are separated from each other by the disparity of form between them. Meaning, in spirituality, it's not by how close or how far the objects are, physically, no, but it's according to the disparity of form, of how similar, how equal, equivalent they are, or how different. So in spirituality, if two things are similar in quality, then they are considered close. If they're different in quality, they're considered far. We also have examples in this world. Let's keep on reading and we'll see an example. So Baal Sulam says, this can be found in our world too. For example, when two people share similar views, they like each other, and the remoteness of location does not cause them to draw far from one another. It's clear. Let's keep going to the next slide. Conversely, when the views are far, they're hateful of each other, and proximity of location will not bring them any closer. You've all experienced that. You could be with someone that's close to you physically, but you have opposite opinions, and you feel the distance between you. So that's an example of how equivalence in qualities can lead to closeness or not. Okay, let's keep reading. Thus, the disparity of form in their views removes them from each other, and the proximity of form in their views brings them closer to each other. If, for example, one's nature is the complete opposite of another's, then they are as far from one another as east from the west. Similarly, let's keep going, next one. Similarly, all matters of nearness and remoteness, coupling and unity that unfold in spirituality, are but measures of disparity of form. They depart from one another according to their measure of disparity of form, and become attached to one another according to their measure of equivalence of form. So, Baal Sulam just explained something very simple here. Just like in order to hear the music that's playing in the room right now, when we gave the example in lesson 1, I think, in order to hear the music that's playing in the room, and there is music playing in this room right now, in every room probably. Why? Because there are radio waves. Simple. So these radio waves, in order to pick them up, I need to get this radio transmitter of mine, and I need to tune it in to the right frequency, and when I do, I'll be able to hear the music that's playing in the room, right? So what do I do in that action? I tune this device to be equivalent to what's out there, to the radio waves that are outside, right? That's how the transistor works. You tune it to a certain frequency, and then it picks up that exact frequency. So that's the law of equivalence of form. So Baal Sulam says that in spirituality, the law of equivalence of form goes according to the quality, if you're similar in qualities. So going back to this, we said this already holds the answer, the key. So the beginning of equivalence of form is actually this right over here. It's this point right over here. And let's take kind of 5 minutes for a side explanation that will explain why this point is the exact beginning of equivalence. So it's a deep explanation, and it's actually pretty cool and pretty amazing. It kind of gives you a zoom out of all of the 14 billion years that have passed, let's say in 3 minutes. You ready for it? Hope you are. Okay, so going back way before the Big Bang, before 14 billion years ago, this is minus 14 billion years. The Big Bang, the beginning of the world, of the universe as we know it. Before that, there was no matter, there was nothing, there was spiritual, and as you might have already learned or read, there was only the creator, the force of giving, and there was the created being. He created, actually, there wasn't even the created being, but he created the created being in order to be able to give him, because the creator was the force of plus. He had ultimate, infinite fulfillment. He wanted to give that fulfillment, so what did he do? He created something opposite of him that will be able to receive. So it's like a hand in a glove. It fits perfectly, just as the opposite, that way it can fit. And in order for the created being to be able to be independent, and we're not going to explain this now, just take it as it is, the upper light and the kli separated. So here, they're in complete harmony and fulfillment. That's the state that we described before, that I told you that you were already once in that state, that's what you have left. So that state was in complete perfection of fulfillment, and it was removed, it was taken away in order, again, to lead a person to independence. So this gradually is levels of concealment. There are actually 125 of these levels of concealment, until at the end there was nothing left except this plus and minus. Meaning the plus is the force of the creator, and it was only a spark left of it at this point because all the rest was concealed, and the minus is the will to receive. And when that happened, when it reached 100% concealment, at this point over here, the Big Bang took place. Now, the Big Bang, there was this development of reality over billions of years, from still to vegetative to animate to speaking. And actually last lesson you spoke about this with Marcus and Chris, and they explained to you how the desire evolved. We're not going to repeat that, but what would just a quick reminder of the end of this, that at the end of the evolution of that desire, there's a state of satiation where it becomes clear to us, and it's becoming more and more evident in humanity, that this minus cannot be fulfilled as it's been fulfilled for centuries, searching for pleasure and knowledge and power and sex and honor and whatnot. And it's becoming clear that this desire has reached satiation. So that would be translated into your feeling that no matter what you do, no matter what your achievements will be, it will never really fulfill you. And that feeling of yours is actually quite accurate. And people today in the world are beginning to feel this more and more. Some are quite lucky to find where they can fulfill what's awakened in them. Now, when you reach that state of satiation, what is awakened inside of you is actually something, a long-lost desire, we can call it that. Because this desire that's awakened in humanity collectively, or in you specifically, that we call the point in the heart, this desire for something more, to raise you above this world, to lift you up, to bring you out of this, as we called it, narrow existence, this same desire, now get this same desire was hidden, concealed in you, in you I mean not you that's been living for 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 years, but in you, in that desire within you that's been living for 14 billion years since it was created. That spark has been there the entire time, and it's been waiting, hidden, concealed, waiting till when? Till now, that it can be finally revealed. And this spark that's in you, that's now ignited, that actually came from 14 billion years ago, that is the key. Why is that the key? Because this spark of yours comes from the Creator. It's the point in you that is exactly equivalent to what's outside here. Now, it's only a dot. It has no volume, because a point has no area, it has no volume. So it still isn't a vessel, it's still not a clear, it can't perceive reality. It's only a feeling. It's this, as if this intuition, this unexplainable intuition that knows there's something out there, that feels it, that doesn't even need to rationalize it, that comes after the explanations. But it's this gut feeling that everything in this world is only leading us to a certain level of development, and to go beyond that, there is something more. And that point in the heart the reason why it knows that is because it works exactly according to this law of equivalence of form. That outside of us, as we said before, we don't know what there is. It's a question mark. But we do know this. We do know that from within our five senses, within this box of ours, there is this single desire, and this desire is made from the same thing that is made. And this desire is the key to our spiritual development. And by developing this desire, okay, we'll just wait with how to develop it. I'm jumping ahead. Let's just first comprehend that. Let's let that absorb. That is it. You all have the beginning. You all have that point of equivalence of form with what is outside of you. And that is the key. All right, do we have any questions about that? Before we move on to what we do with that point, how do we develop it? Because that's the clear next question.
About this, I think students are still kind of absorbing. Also, we'll keep in mind the 30 seconds, more or less a delay until it reaches them. So
right.
About that, I think we're still in absorption mode. But we can move forward or further explain this, or go to questions we had from before.
All right, so maybe let's just conclude another point until we kind of have final questions about that, and then we can go to more questions. So right now, the addition that we just added in the last few minutes, say 10 minutes, is very simple. We understood that we don't know where we are, that we have 5 openings, or which are actually filters, and they work according to this hardware or software. Hardware is able to receive pleasure. That does not change. So this is unchanging. And the software, the intention to receive, can change. And actually, by changing that, we can change our perception of reality. So then the question is, how do we change it? So the answer was based on this law of equivalence of form, that in spirituality, if things are equal, then they become close. So if we want to come closer to the spiritual world, to bestowal, if we want to cross this mahsom, this barrier, as Asaf explained it, we need to an extent, develop something that from here is equal to this. And actually, we also said that we already have this beginning of equivalence, and we described it as this point in the heart, right? So this point in the heart of yours, the reason why it's equivalent is because it wasn't invented now. It didn't just come to you now. It actually came from the beginning of creation, where you were already once in equivalence with that force. That's why you intuitively feel that it's good. You feel that it's right. You're drawn to it without any maybe rational explanation. It's kind of what it is. It's above your reason. It's above this world. And that is the beginning of the equivalence of form with what's outside of you. That's the point in the heart. And in a moment, we'll also maybe explain what it means to develop that point.
All right, so until we have questions on that, maybe we'll take a bunch of questions that were revolving around the point in the heart. So questions like, what exactly is that sixth sense, and what does it have to do with, and what is it connected to or not? So now you understand very clearly. That point in the heart is the beginning of what we referred to as the 5 senses. It's the beginning of your, what we call vessel, in which you receive, attain, feel, experience the spiritual world. That point in the heart means what? It means that question, it appears in the form of question and a need, a question mark, a void that feels that it cannot be fulfilled within the 5 senses. When you're asking yourselves questions such as, what's going on here? What's the point in all of this? What's the meaning of it all? Where does it all come from? Is there something beyond this ordinary feeling that I'm living? Is there an end or a purpose to the entire race, which sometimes more and more feels like a rat race. If you look at the reality of this world, do we just live for 70, 80, 100 years, whatever, and that's it, and we bring back this flesh and blood body of ours, we bring back the equipment, so to speak, that's it, that's where it ends? When those questions surface in you, they represent that need, that desire that we refer to as a point in the heart. And that is, in fact, Kabbalah says, not just a theoretical, philosophical, questioning period in your life. And if you go, research children and what they're asking, you'll see that a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old usually has that question. And they go, Daddy, Mommy, what's going on? Why do we live? What do we live for? What's going on? Because it's a natural thing. Every human being has that point in the heart. The question is whether they develop it or not, whether they feel it inside them burning, requiring an answer, and they want to develop it further or not, or they just kind of sink into the currents of daily life and keep moving forward in that kind of general noise of life, so to speak. Those in whom that point is on fire, they search and they search and they go through different things, and they eventually, Kabbalists tell us, they find the wisdom of Kabbalah, because Kabbalah was created and developed by people who had the same question and had the same point in the heart and decided that they're going to focus on it. And what they've discovered once they put their efforts and time and mental resources into that and started researching that, they discovered that it's a desire that opens up and evolves like a flower that opens up. And there's actually a natural process with like an entire map of development that becomes revealed once you put the effort into focusing on that. That's all that we're doing in the wisdom of Kabbalah. You're learning where is that desire, that it doesn't have anything to do with your 5 senses, that it's a desire that is different from your desire for food, sex, family, money, honor, power, knowledge. It isn't the desire for knowledge. It's the desire to connect with the source of life itself, because it's a spark of the creator, of the source of life itself. That's where it came from, as you saw in that zoomed out process that Gilad was just describing. And so if you feel you have to develop that point, if you feel that what we're describing speaks to something in you that was actually asking these questions, maybe even throughout your life, whether you were paying attention to it more or less, that is the point in the heart, and that is the beginning of the sense that we're talking about. Kabbalah will teach you where it is and how to develop it, in quality and quantity, to the point where you can actually begin to feel the flow of that spiritual reality in it. All right, so
maybe we'll while you pick up the next question, then let's maybe kind of add one last layer, which you might be asking now. So once we've already said that we need equivalence of form, and we've said that the point in the heart is the beginning of that equivalence of form, the next reasonable question would be to ask, okay, so how do we develop that point? How do we make it from a point that has, as we said, no area, no volume? How do we develop it into an actual vessel, into a tool that can reach equivalence of form and connect us to this reality which is infinite fulfillment, which we call spirituality? So the answer lies in the software, and that is the wisdom of Kabbalah, the wisdom of how to receive. So every time, by the way, in this course, you'll see that we open something up, and as that opens up, then additional things are kind of question marked again. So you'll always have one level of revelation, something that you suddenly understand, and along with that comes another question, which is good. Keeps you kind of constantly in this inner desire, which is very, very important in the study. So the answer goes like this. All you have to do is change your software. That's the key to spirituality. If you do that, bang, you're in spirituality. You perceive everything. All the spiritual worlds are in your hands if you do only that. If you change your software from in order to receive for myself, for the intention in order to receive, to the intention in order to give. Now, it's harder than it sounds, because actually it's outside of a person's perception. It's impossible to even grasp what this means. It can obviously be done. The wisdom of Kabbalah teaches you how to do it. But just maybe to give an example from this world that can kind of explain what it means to change, to receive something in order to give. Now this is a corporeal example, and obviously it's still under the same hardware and software. But imagine that your friend, your partner, your mother made this your favorite food. Your favorite. Now let's say you just came back and you already ate, you didn't know. So you already ate dinner or lunch or whatever it was. And you're full. But now you come and you see in front of you this dish, and you suddenly realize that, your partner, say, surprised you, or your mother surprised you with this dish. And now you can decide what to do. So you can say, "No, thanks, I'm not hungry." Or you can eat in order to give pleasure to the maker of the dish. Right? So now you're eating it. So the action you're doing, the hardware is still to receive. You're still eating it. You're still taking something in. You're consuming something. So the action is reception. But the intention that you're doing it for is in order to give pleasure to your partner who invested a lot of time in making this for you. So you want to give it back to them. You want to give them. So you give them by receiving. Right? So that's just an example from this world how the intention can be clothed onto an action of reception, and by doing so, it flips the entire action, even though the action is still receiving. And like we said, that is what we will always be doing. We can never come out of this state. We can never change our hardware, because that's what we're created. That's us, a will to receive pleasure. But we can change the way we use it. And if we change the way we use it, we've crossed this mahsom, this barrier. We're in the spiritual world. So now you might be asking, the next question is, how do we change the intention? So we're not going to open that up today, because we're reaching the end of the lesson. But we will say that the entire wisdom of Kabbalah is exactly that. It teaches how to receive. And now you can understand what it means, how to receive. How to receive with the intention in order to bestow, in order to give. Because by doing that, you unleash your potential of your desire. You're not locked and limited by the restrictions that it currently has under the existing framework of receive in order to receive. Do we have any more questions to conclude?
I think we have a bunch of questions that I've kind of collected, some from the last few minutes and some from before. Let's just use a few minutes that we have left.
All right, let's just do like a 5-minute kind of lightning round.
All right, so let's try to go through these quickly. So Kitty Cricket from Montreal was asking, if someone were to feel like they didn't want to be in the earth realm anymore, as in did not want to reincarnate anymore and ascend to a higher non-physical realm, like in Buddhism, is that like the point in the heart? For all those questions about the point in the heart, it's good that you've started focusing your ideas on developing the sense to feel the spiritual reality on that new concept. It's a new concept, that a new term as well, that Kabbalah teaches you, the point in the heart. To put it very simply, Bar Sulam, Kabbalist Yehuda Ashlag, explains the point in the heart is that question that a person has about the meaning of life. What is the point in life itself? Which means that within this world, whatever it is you're looking for, whatever it is that you can get, whatever fulfillment that you can have in money and sex and family and food and honor, power, knowledge, whatever it is, you're asking not about why didn't this or that work out. You're asking, what is the source of it all? Where is it coming from? Why do I live altogether, what's the meaning of it all? If you have that question, that's that inkling, that need that needs to be solved, that severe kind of question in a person that won't settle for any fulfillment of this world through the five senses or any psychological comfort. If that is burning in your bones, you feel that you've come into this world in order to answer this. You have to answer this question. You just have to. That's the point in the heart. Joshua from Calgary asked earlier on, what pleasure really is in terms of the standards of the Creator? I'll give a shot at answering this in 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So think of all of the pleasures that you can imagine. Everything, all the best possible moments that happened in your life, right? If someone, a girl told you that she loves you, that she's in love with you, and you told her you love her, and you won the lottery, and you got the best grade at school, and all of that. Take all those moments, put them together, then take all the moments of all of humanity combined, put them together, and that can't even compare with the kind of pleasure that we're talking about when we are talking about spirituality. Why? Because it's beyond the parameters of our limited bodily existence within time, space, and motion. Next, Hesney from Westchester said earlier on, it's not really a question, but there is a reason why I picked it up. He said, I find it complicated. My religion, tradition, training interferes.
I'll take this in 30 seconds. All right. Mm-hmm. So, what's the name?
Hesney.
Okay, Hesney. It's very simple. Religion, actually all religions, and you can check it up on our website. We have some explanations there. They all come from the study of nature, which is the wisdom of Kabbalah. And all religions, what they do is they give a framework based in many cases on the laws of nature, but they give a framework for this world. That's what they do. They tell you the actions you need to do in this world, do this, do that, behave like this, behave like that. Not good nor bad, I'm not talking about that now, I'm just saying what religion is. So, the wisdom of Kabbalah talks about how to rise to this world. That's why when Baal Sulam, he describes Kabbalah, he says that people can stay in their religion. There is no conflict whatsoever. Because when you study the wisdom of Kabbalah, you're studying on how to develop your point in the heart, what we described right now. And when you practice religion, you're actually not referring to the point in the heart, but you're referring to the rest of the heart. Meaning how you live in this world, what your moral code is, what actions you do, what food you eat, if it's halal or if it's kosher, or if you do this or if you do that. All it is the behavior on this world, based on different perspectives, let's call it. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, or any of the 3,700 religions that were counted in reality, in humanity. All of these speak about this lower layer over here, and the wisdom of Kabbalah talks about how to rise to the spiritual world. Therefore, there is no conflict whatsoever.
Philip from California asked, do people who have passed on, people who died, see a different reality? The answer is no. If you already understood by now that the reality, the perception of the new reality that we're describing doesn't happen through the body. It happens through a specific spark within the desire, a specific desire within our general desires for this world. There's a desire that is not for this world, and that needs to develop. Then you already understand that people who die, that it's simply the body that dies, and it rots in the ground, and that's it, nothing happens. If a person has developed their eternal part that is detached from their body, that it doesn't depend on the existence of the body, and continues in reality whether the body exists or not, which is the desire, if they have attained spirituality, then this goes on regardless of what happens to their body.
Okay, we actually have a nice question here from David from Canada. If I change my software, does that affect everyone?
Yeah, it's actually two questions.
Right.
Two questions.
So you connected to from David as well.
Yeah.
All right.
Left
the
that
other
one for
also.
the end.
Yep. So exactly. So that's where we are basically. So maybe you want to conclude with that question.
All right. So David
Go
from
ahead.
Manitoba asked, if we as students of Kabbalah take a faster path to reach the Creator, will this affect the entire world? Or do we have to wait for the rest of humanity to correct themselves in order to reach that higher level, to reach Ein Sof? In other words, if I change my software, does it affect everyone? The answer is yes, because we're all interconnected. We're actually, all of us right now are a single entity. We're one creature. We were connected as one, and within our perception, we were shattered into individual pieces. I'll throw another word there, individual egos. We'll understand that later on. But we are essentially shattered pieces of the same thing. There was one entity, one desire, a collective desire that was created in reality. And we only feel our reality as fragments of that desire. And so, when some of us, in other words, those with a point in the heart, those with that spark that's being turned on, those with a burning question about the meaning of life, who are moving forward towards the connection with the source of life, the Creator, when we move forward, because we're interconnected with all the other shattered pieces, we're pushing the entire system forward. This is something that at the moment you will just kind of understand it, on a general kind of level. The more you'll advance, you'll begin to actually see it. You'll begin to relate everything that's happening in the world with what's happening within yourself, with what's happening with all the others who are working on spiritual development together with you. And life will become a lot more kind of holistic and whole than kind of shattered, fragmented pieces of reality. So definitely that question is on the right track.
All right, actually I have another question. No, I have another
Mm-hmm.
question that was posted in the EC forum, and I want to bring it up here. I'll explain why in a second. But before I do, two quick yes or no questions. Beverly from Montana says, so going back to your other example, the knife is a knife that cannot change because that's its hardware. The software can be changed depending on how or whom it's being used. Is that a correct analogy? Yes, it is. Very good. And Taishela from Chicago, is the point in the heart equivalent to the soul? Kind of. It's the beginning of the soul. If you develop the point in the heart, then you have a soul. So now to my final question that is unrelated to the lesson maybe directly, but it's an important question, and I'll explain why I'm asking this now. So someone posted in the EC forum, they asked a question. In the first lesson we mentioned that the course isn't free, but it seems like the course is free because there was no charge of you to be here. So the reason why I'm bringing this up now is because, first of all, to answer that, the course actually is not free. The course goes according to a model which is called pay what you wish, which is a great model. It means you can pay what you wish. So if you wish to pay zero, then for you the course is free, I guess. Why do we go according to that model? The answer is very simple. We want to bring this method, and like David now asked, we want to bring it to as many people as possible. We want anyone and everyone in the world who has that desire awakened in them, regardless of where they are or what their income is, to find this wisdom and have access to it.
At this point, it's important to just state it very simply, that if you were asking yourself that B'nai Baruch Kabbalah Education and Research Institute is simply a nonprofit that is dedicated, its mission statement is to share the authentic wisdom of Kabbalah with the world. And that's why we make all the efforts that we can in order to provide these materials to anyone as best as we can.
Right. So again, to answer the question, the course is not free because although we are volunteers, Asaf and myself, and so is Barak, who's sitting in the next room, and so are our team of moderators who are located right now in America, right now in Israel. Although these are all volunteers, still the two cameras in front of us cost money, the two monitors, the board, the servers that this is on, the website, of course, all of these things, they cost money. We're still living in this world. So what we decided to do in order to cover these costs and make it available for everyone, we decided to go according to a model of pay what you wish. In other words, our estimated cost per student per semester is $25. Again, per student per semester. Now, some students, for them, that's a lot of money, because if you live in India maybe, then $25 might be a lot. But for others, it might be a little. So what we've seen from last semester is that students, they give based on what they want or what they can, and how much they want to kind of, if they can cover for other students that can't necessarily pay, then they do that, and that's highly appreciated and valued. So the question is, I already see, and it's already heartwarming that Hesni and David are asking, how do you pay? So by tomorrow, you will also get this in your email, so don't worry, you'll get an email with instructions of how to pay. And starting from, let's say, tomorrow morning Eastern time, you will see a banner in the ECA website. It'll just be up there, a little bit annoying there, but you'll see it right as long as you log in. And the banner will explain everything I just explained now, and it will give you payment options. So,
and if you have more questions about this or anything, you can always send general questions to ec@kabbalah.info. We'll be glad to answer them.
Absolutely.
Or answer them in this lesson. We'll always be glad to answer all your questions.
Right.
There's also the student forum that we should mention.
Right. There's a student forum. Basically, you can ask your questions there. Anything that's outside of the lesson. Many of you watch the recording lesson, the lesson recorded. So if you have questions that come up during watching the recording, you can write them down in the forum and you'll be assisted there.
Right. And some of you asked something about the technical terms of the lights and the parzufim, the vessels in which the lights come into, things like that. We couldn't get into that, but you will have you have 2 lessons a week. And the Sunday lesson is the structure of creation lesson. It's dedicated to these topics. So definitely go ahead and ask your questions about this kind of questions there. Also, I would like to recommend a book. If those of you who are interested in that, I saw a couple questions on that. Go to Kabbalahbooks.info and look for the book, The Science of Kabbalah. If you're interested in that kind of more technical aspect of the structure of creation, that's definitely a book that's worthwhile getting. Kabbalahbooks.info, Structure of Creation. So your next lesson, which will be a Structure of Creation lesson, is on Sunday. That's May 14th, the regular time. That's 8 p.m. Eastern time. Anything else?
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure being here. We did, although, connect through the virtual lines, and we see your names in chat, so we can still feel kind of the strong desire of you students in the class. It really is heartwarming. Thank you for being interactive. Thank you for asking questions, and thank you for joining us.
Yes, and we'll happily see you next time. All the best.
Bye-bye.